Welcome to Open Season Television Reviews. I'm Kora, and this is the show where I look at and review individual seasons of television shows, sometimes with the aid of my friends at Media Whores. Today I'm looking at Two Broke Girls, a show that debuted on CBS this past year, and seems like an interesting place to start. The show is focused around two, broke girls named Max and Caroline, as they try and build up finances to start a cupcake business. Okay, I was not immediately sold on the show's premise. It wasn't until the end of the first episode that I actually saw something that piqued my interest. That's right. They give you a concrete answer at the end of each episode as to how close they are to reaching their goal of $250,000. This is actually a very interesting idea, because in theory it adds a sense of progression. There is a downside in the actual execution, but I'll get to that in a minute. The rest of the premise is that both girls currently work in a diner, and they occasionally take on secondary jobs in order to move closer to their goal. The next thing I want to examine about this show is its characters. This is simultaneously one of the biggest factors in both the plus column and in the minus column for this show. Let's start off with the primary characters. First we have Max, who has always been poor and therefore serves as a street-smart but bitter and cynical member of the cast. This is a relatively straightforward character structure, but they put a bit of an original spin on it.
You think this is the sound that gets you service? I think this is the sound that dries up my vagina.
And I suppose it's a rather tried and true setup. It's sort of like if Phoebe from Friends was merged with Becker.
Excuse me? Am I interested in changing my long-distance carrier? Thanks for calling.
Caroline, on the other hand, is the daughter of a now-disgraced businessman who's been arrested for his involvement in a Ponzi scheme, a la Bernie Madoff. I'd like to note that one of these characters is far more effective than the other. You'd expect it to be pretty obvious which one I find annoying, since it's a cynical city girl versus a spoiled, formerly rich girl. But it's not as straightforward as you might think. Ironically, Caroline was the stronger character in my opinion. Max often ends up being very dejected and quick to give up on her goals. This is often used as a stalling tactic in order to fill out episodes, and the amount of self-confidence that she possesses seems to shift wildly in a number of instances. Caroline, on the other hand, despite being somewhat spoiled, is far more likely to stick to something and will not allow herself to give up. It's an interesting twist on the character of the spoiled rich girl, and it's a twist that works pretty well. Now, where this show tends to fall short is in the secondary cast, which mainly consists of the other diner workers. We'll start with the cashier Earl, who's played by SNL alumni Garrett Morris. This role pretty much screams, I needed a paycheck. And sadly, the role can actually be summed up with the phrase, aging funky black guy.
I couldn't stop disco, but I'll be damned if any more of that crap gets by me.
If that sounds like a stereotype, congratulations, your ears work. I would argue that he is actually the least offensive of the secondary characters because he has the most personality. Not that that is saying much, but he tends to be the most humorous as well. And then there is Oleg, who is a perverted Ukrainian cook. Once again, not exactly much character there. He's essentially what you'd get if you took every raunchy sex joke you ever heard and pounded them together into a human form. Pounded them hard.
Pick up table 10, table 12, table 69.
Oleg, there is no table 69.
There could be.
Lastly, you have the owner of the diner, Han Lee, who is Asian. That is pretty much the whole character wrapped up in one word.
Word. I saw that on the wire.
I'm guessing you can kind of see one of the problems with this show. It tends to rely on stereotypes to the point that it wouldn't really be unfair to call it somewhat racist. As for the actual execution, if I were to try and divide up what the focus of the humor is, I'd argue that at least 50% of the jokes here are sex jokes.
Got some cheap fabric and bedding places down on Houston Street? What do you think?
I think you've made a vagina.
Another 25 to 30% are focused around racial stereotypes, and I'd say another 15% are targeted at hipsters, with the last 5 to 10% just being miscellaneous topics. And going back to the sense of continuity that I mentioned before, where they show you how much money they've accumulated at the end of each episode, the problem with having continuity is that it only becomes relevant when the plot actually progresses. Throughout the overwhelming majority of the first season, their finances bounce back and forth between roughly $600 and $900. This does nothing to create an actual sense of progress. What's more, the humor itself is often very, very lacking. If I had to describe all of it in one word, I'd probably go with raunchy, but that's not why the humor is in the minus column for me. The reason I put it in the minus column is due to the fact that the jokes are so ridiculously obvious.
What did the crying sound like?
Like,
I wasn't crying.
well then what were you Oh, so none of my business.
This is the kind of humor that shows up over and over again.
He's gone. I don't get to shove this in his face. It would have been nice to put my wad in his face for a change.
It occasionally works, and I will give it credit for that, but it's just too rare of an occurrence. And the show loves to hate on hipsters, and that's not particularly funny, because they're just kind of a popular punching bag at the moment.
Hipsters like karaoke.
Replace the word like with the word Hitler, and you've got the 3 worst things in history.
Ultimately, the show suffers from poor writing. The core idea is decent, but it's hindered by lazy dialogue. Sometimes it's just minor details. On a number of occasions in the show, the characters refer to the diner's walk-in freezer. You see that milk? And those vegetables? That's a refrigerator. Then there's the fact that they keep Caroline's horse Chestnut in the backyard. Looking past the fact that zoning laws are never even brought up, it still culminates in this little gym where Caroline falls in the backyard into what I assume is supposed to be horse crap, except that it looks nothing like it. This may be nitpicky, but even if I had 5,000 guesses as to what that was, I don't think horse crap would be among them. And those are just the minor details. The writers introduce plot threads out of nowhere and then toss them aside with such abruptness you'd think there were spiders hanging off of the damn things. Max gets a romantic subplot with a street artist midway through the season. The guy, Johnny, is brought out of nowhere, and the entire ordeal is so freaking back-asswards that it ultimately just feels like a massive waste of time. The writing flows about as smoothly as lard, and it feels like it's padding a show that really doesn't have any reason not to progress more rapidly. By my estimates, it'll probably take 250 plus seasons for them to reach their goal, given their progress in this season. Wrapping up, despite some strong chemistry between its leads and a solid premise, this show ends up failing to leave an actual impact due to a weak secondary cast and poor writing overall. The best episode is a little difficult to pinpoint, but I guess I'd go with the 4th episode, Two Broke Girls and the Rich People Problems, because it did a good job establishing Caroline's strengths as well as her relationship with Max. The worst episode is also difficult to pinpoint, mainly due to the fact that because the show relies on stereotypes as much as it does, different people are likely to hate different episodes. Therefore, I don't know if personal bias had an effect, but in my opinion, Two Broke Girls and the Kosher Cupcakes was by far the worst episode of this series, and one of the worst episodes I've seen in this past year.
Yeah, what up, cupcake bitches? I'm fixing to marry me a biatch who bakes like this, son.
Dear incompetent dumbass.
Even if future seasons prove to be stronger, it's not really worth it to trudge through this first season. I have a hard time believing that there are any significant plot points that you'd be missing. My rating for this one is 2 stars out of 5. It's a below average show. My recommendation is that you skip it, but if you are curious, there are worse things out there to watch. Still, let's hope this show learns that if it's broke, you really should fix it. See you next time.